I'm Emma Thompson, also known as the sales therapist. In terms of Find the Thought, the method that I teach my clients, it's very much based on you have an initial thought. It's always very fleeting. It's rooted in past experiences, past trauma, but that thought then creates a feeling and it makes you feel a certain way. And then that feeling creates a behaviour. Now that behaviour then creates your identity. So you form this identity of yourself based on these behaviours that you display, but it's not necessarily a behaviour that's good or helpful. So what we do is we take a mirror, hold it up, look at that behaviour, and that can be really polarising. It can be hard to do. We address that behaviour and then we work it back to what is the feeling underneath all of that. How is this making you feel? How are you feeling in this moment? And again, that can be hard for people to do. But if we can address the feeling, we can label it, we can sit with it, give it space and understand why it's there, and then work it back that one step further to the root thought. What is the thought that has triggered everything? What is this story that I'm telling myself that is allowing for this behaviour, that is allowing me to feel this way? And when you can find that story, that thought that you're telling yourself, you can begin to question it. And the questioning is key. If you can question, you can unpick, you can unpack. It shouldn't be this finished article. It should be able to be rewritten, made better, made more beneficial to you. This isn't mindset woo-woo. It's root cause demolition. The Inquisitor podcast, find the thoughts, listen now, or stay stuck.
Hello and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor podcast. Today my guest is Emma Thompson. She's known as the sales therapist. She works with salespeople, sales leaders, sales teams, and helps them get behind the thought that is holding them back and deals with them at a fundamental psychological level so that they can actually perform at their best. It's going to be a very uncomfortable listen for many of you because you're going to be looking into the ugly mirror and you're going to be saying, oh shit, that's me. The good news is that Emma and I will be exploring what causes you to self-sabotage and how you can fix that. So without any further ado, Emma, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Would you mind going through your brief history, over 60 seconds, just keep it nice and tight, so that people understand how you got to do what you do and what you do?
Okay, well, I decided to become a hypnotherapist. So that is primarily what I do. I do coach alongside that now. But all of that basically stemmed from my own childhood, my own story over the years, experiences that I've had, traumas, everything that really caused me to, again, hold a mirror up, like you had said at the beginning there, holding a mirror up and really looking at the kind of ugly truth of why do I behave the way I do? And when I started to unlock some of that within myself, I realized this is so fascinating and I love it. And I want to be able to do this for other people as well. And it is a journey. I'm certainly not saying that I've got it all figured out. I have not. But it is about being able to start addressing those behaviors that are holding you back because they are rooted in past stories from years and years ago, from your childhood, that are outdated, that no longer need to play a role in your life.
Excellent. Okay, so today we're going to confront the audience with psychological patterns that are sabotaging their go-to-market execution and at least scaffold a framework to reclaim agency, to reframe their identity and interrupt the toxic patterns of behavior that hold them back. So let's start with the question, what if it's not your technique? What if it's not just your system, but actually it's how you think? Let's start with the concept of find the thought.
It always is the way you think. It's not your frameworks or the things that you're putting into motion that are the problem. It's very likely that those are exactly right and they're the way they should be. But the bit that's actually stopping you or preventing you from achieving or from moving forwards or whatever it might be in your life is very much the thought behind everything that's playing in your mind. So in terms of Find the Thought, the methods that I teach my clients, it's very much based on you have an initial thought. It's always very fleeting. It's rooted in past experiences, past trauma, but that thought then creates a feeling and it makes you feel a certain way. And then that feeling creates a behavior. Now, that behavior then puts out into the world who you are as a person. That creates your identity. So you form this identity of yourself based on these behaviors that you display every day when something happens, when you're made to feel a certain way. But it's not necessarily a behavior that's good or helpful. And it's not necessarily something that you should even be doing, because perhaps the thought, the story that you're telling yourself behind it all is something that you picked up in childhood, or it's something that you picked up from your parents or your teachers or your peers, or even from the media. And it's not necessarily relevant to you. And most of the time, it's not even truth. So what we do is we take a mirror, hold it up, look at that behavior, and that can be really polarizing. It can be hard to do because we don't really want to pick out our flaws and say, oh, I've got this that's awful and people don't like this about me. And we become very defensive when we're forced to look at behaviors that perhaps are less than flattering. But if you can do that, that's the first step. We address that behavior, and then we work it back to what is the feeling underneath all of that. How is this making you feel? How are you feeling in this moment? And again, that can be hard for people to do. Some people aren't necessarily very good at picking out what that feeling might be. But if we can address the feeling, we can label it, we can sit with it, give it space and understand why it's there, and then work it back that one step further to the root thought. What is the thought that has triggered everything? What is this story that I'm telling myself that is allowing for this behavior, that is allowing me to feel this way? And when you can find that story, that thought that you're telling yourself, you can begin to question it. And the questioning is key. If you can question, you can unpick, you can unpack. I always say it's almost a little bit like when you're at school and you hand an essay into your teacher and they get their red pen and they start marking all over it, cite your sources, rewrite this. That's exactly what you should be doing with your story. Taking it, it shouldn't be this finished article. It should be able to be rewritten, made better, made more beneficial to you. So you've got to go in there with that red pen as that teacher, mark all over it. This doesn't even make sense. This isn't good enough.
So what I'm hearing here is a parallel to a lot of the work that I do with my clients, which is to explore scripting, what we've inherited, what we borrowed, what's true, what isn't. And this is helping people to separate the difference between perception and opinion and perspective and truth. Now, what would be really helpful without breaking any confidences is maybe giving an example of when what that thought might be in the context of a salesperson or a founder.
Okay. Yes. I mean, I've worked with a lot of salespeople. I often actually find that with everyone across the board, the running theme, no matter what, is that feeling of not being enough. And I will go into more details in terms of sort of what else it, might be, the stories that you tend to tell yourself. But the running theme for every single human being is that feeling of not being enough. And that plays a massive role, because if you don't think you're enough, every time you try to do something, every time you try to put yourself out there, a new idea, a new business, whatever it might be, there's that little voice in the back of your head saying, well, you're not good enough. That's not good enough. You won't be able to do that.
Who am I to?
Absolutely. Who on earth are you to think that you can do that? No, that's not going to work for you. And that is generally the running theme. So whenever I work with a client and we go into hypnosis, every single client, no matter what the issue might be, at some point in that session will say, I don't feel good enough. I'm not enough. And it is always that running theme. So that is kind of the root thought for everyone. You could pick anyone out of a lineup and you could say, you don't feel good enough about yourself.
So how much of this imposter syndrome is imprinted in early childhood typically, and what kind of trauma are people taking into their adult lives?
So most of our sort of narrative and our stories and our beliefs about ourselves and the world around us are formed between the ages of 0 and 7. So it's a very young age and we're like sponges and we absorb absolutely everything around us. And of course, at that age, you don't question anything. You just take everything on as truth. What your parents are saying, teachers, friends, the media, everything around you, you just absorb like a little sponge. And that then writes itself into kind of your framework, your narrative, your beliefs, about the world around you, society, other people. Obviously, it's also based on experiences, usually in those formative years, some maybe sort of in later years, but whenever I work with clients, when we go back to visit certain scenes from the past, they are usually rooted within those younger years. They might go into the teenage years a little bit, but it's always the childhood. So those experiences that you have, something might happen. It might be something as simple as you breaking a vase and a parent shouting and saying, "Oh, for goodness sake, you've done it again. You're absolutely useless." And what happens is when you're made to feel a certain way a few times over, so it might happen once and then a second time, usually by the third time, something like that happens and it creates a feeling, perhaps that feeling's of inadequacy, or you're scared. Once you've felt that feeling, usually on the third time, it creates what's called an imprint in your mind. So that imprint is like this bit in your brain that goes, "Oh, we don't like feeling like this. This isn't nice. What can we do about that to prevent you from feeling like this in the future?" And then your brain forms a protection mechanism for you, a part of you that helps you deflect any of those feelings or prevent those feelings from happening as much as they possibly can. And imagine you've then created this part of you at the age of 7 years old because you felt inadequate and scared. You've created this part of self-doubt that you then carry from the age of 7 into your adult life. And then as an adult, you are in your relationships, your business, you are building your life, but you are carrying this part that creates self-doubt, because every time you feel a bit inadequate or you feel a bit scared, this self-doubt part comes rushing in to put a halt on everything. Stop it all. We don't want you to feel like this. So that's what the problem is that people carry these beliefs, these parts of themselves that they've created in childhood into their adult life. And then they are playing out that same story, that same narrative in their adult lives that is obviously not at all beneficial. It's totally outdated. It's not necessary. But they can't stop because they have formed that neural pathway in their brain that takes them down that route every time.
So this then creates defensiveness, avoidance behavior, excuses, blame.
Exactly.
And so it feels like you're not living by choice, but by conditioning. And you mentioned those trauma. One of the things that I've observed is that very often perfectionism is one of those problems. So people tend to get stuck in that rut. And often that is a reaction to childhood shaming. Um, do you see that pattern happening, or am I on the wrong path?
Hmm. There's a lot of it is very much rooted in childhood, and it will usually go to sort of the parenting, the way that child has been parented, or perhaps the way they were treated at school.
Mhm.
Those tend to be the two themes that I see. So if it might be sort of parents who perhaps were maybe sort of quite vocal or angry in some way and shouted a lot, or sort of weren't kind of emotionally available for the child, that has a massive impact. At school, it might be sort of being bullied, being left out, being excluded. These are all these sort of kind of themes that I tend to see. Sometimes it can honestly be something as simple as not doing well on a test at school and feeling bad about yourself. And that's honestly, sometimes it really is that simple. I think people seem to think that it needs to be this really traumatic event, something truly awful that has happened. And it doesn't. I see a lot of the time we're visiting scenes and people are just talking about, "Oh, they didn't invite me to their birthday party." And that made them feel awful. It made
Mhm.
them feel not good enough, made them feel, like they weren't worthy of other people's time. And it's a very small thing, but it has a big impact because, as I say, if that feeling happens a number of times over and over again, and that child is made to feel a certain way, that's when they create this part of themselves that's this protection mechanism.
So Philip Larkin was right. They fuck you up, your mum and dad. They don't mean to, but they do. They fill you with all the shit they
Honestly,
have in the house,
like
and extra just for you.
regardless of how fantastic your parents might be, there will be something that they have done that has had an impact and caused an issue in your adult life. I heard a story. It was a colleague who had a client who basically said, I can't have a proper relationship with anyone because my parents were so in love and they had the happiest marriage and they were just the two loveliest, happiest people together. But because they had this perfect marriage and it's full of love, full of happiness, it had created this unrealistic expectation on relationships. So taking that into adult life, this person could no longer find find a relationship, couldn't find a relationship that matched up to the parents' relationship. So
No,
it
that's
really is
interesting.
as simple as that.
Well, let's explore a couple of angles on this, particularly for the context of our audience. Money concept,
Mhm.
self-concept, and conflict, because these are all critical elements of anyone in business. And in my experience, people are often programmed to believe that money doesn't grow on trees, it's hard to come by, that people who have a lot of money have somehow trampled over the backs of others in order to get their success. That all conflict is bad. Instead of seeing constructive conflict as a positive thing, and seeing constructive criticism about the behavior being a positive addition to their experience, as opposed to seeing all criticism as being a personal attack on their identity. So I'd like to explore those themes, if I may.
Let's start with money. Money is a massive one. I'd be lying if I said that's not something that's played a role in my own life as well. I think money is a big one for everyone across the board because really, how much do people talk about money? How many families are, actually give their children education around money? What you would normally tend to hear as a child, if you are perhaps part of a family that struggles financially, you might notice your parents worry, or they might be a little bit, panicked about paying the bills, and they might be talking to each other, or they might even be talking to the child about how worried they are. Oh my gosh, we're not going to be able to afford this, or I can't afford to go and get the groceries, or I'm not going to be able to do this. And it's this constant worry that the child picks up on and is like, okay, well, oh my gosh, we don't have any money. Um, and then you add elements like, especially sort of with kind of perhaps religion. Religion plays a huge part in the stories we tell ourselves and the beliefs we hold. Religion especially can feed into that, with you need to be sort of humble about what you have, give to others, make sure you aren't holding it all in for yourself, keeping it for yourself. Make sure you share your wealth and what you have. And it's very much this narrative of, be humble, don't, be too much. That's always a theme. Don't be too much in all areas, not just financially. But all of these sort of stories of, like, as you say, money doesn't grow on trees, all of these little things that you have that you hear about money, then you carry into your adult life. And you'll see in some people, they'll either be so tight with money and they can't let go of it at all. And it's like this constant concern of, like, I need to make sure I have loads in savings, and I mustn't buy this and I mustn't do this. And they live well below their means because they've got that fear surrounding money. Or you've got the other side of people who perhaps didn't have much money as a child, but now they're like, oh, okay, I'm quite doing well. But then they go and spend it all. And it's, oh, I've got all this money, so what's the point? This is exciting. And then they kind of get themselves into debt. And there's so many blockages surrounding money that people have. And it plays a massive part. I've had a few clients where we've addressed money beliefs and money issues, and it's always, always rooted in how they grew up as a child, what they had or didn't have as a child.
So let's go into conflict as well, because I think unless we're ready to have difficult conversations, we're very unlikely to grow. We'll just compound more of that scripting that tells us either we're not enough, or we have to blame others, or we externalize instead of take ownership and be accountable. Um, so I'm very curious to understand how this manifests in your experience working with clients, and what can be done in order to help people feel comfortable with the idea of being uncomfortable.
There's just ancestrally, I think we are very much wired to resort to the negative in all situations because, of course, when we were in tribes living in caves, it would have been a case of we need to keep ourselves safe. It could be a matter of life or death. If you're rejected from the tribe, then you would be cast out and you would die. If you didn't have any food, you would die. If you didn't have somewhere to sleep, warmth, whatever, you would die. So everything is very much rooted in you will die. That is our brain's natural response. So when anything comes up that makes us feel uncomfortable, it triggers this bit in our brain that's like, oh, maybe it's a matter of life or death. Obviously, it isn't. We're in a modern day society where it's not a matter of life or death, but your brain still reverts to that narrative, to that ancestral wiring that we all very much have. So it's about being able to understand that you have a different choice. You don't need to take that pathway of the kind of negative option. Let's go into fight or flight mode. There is another option. There is another choice that you can make. You can create a new pathway to go down. When you are met with discomfort, you can choose to embrace it. And that's something that I've made as a sort of personal theme, to embrace discomfort. Because every time you do embrace discomfort, you are telling your brain, see, we can do this. And every time you do that, your brain creates this new neural pathway. So every time you do something difficult, it tells your brain, nothing bad happened. We can do this. And it creates this pathway of the other option, which is like, no, we can do it. And as you do that more and more and more, you build this pathway. That pathway gets stronger and stronger and stronger. It starts off kind of like when you start building a new pathway in your brain, it's like walking through a dense wooded area. It's, there's nowhere to walk. You have to kind of carve your way out through the grass. But the more you walk that, if you walk that path every single day, that pathway gets more obvious, and then it becomes a dirt track. And then the more you walk it, the stronger it becomes. And it's exactly the same when you are trying to create a new habit, when you're trying to do something to create this new narrative within yourself. You have to remain consistent. Your brain learns by repetition. The more you do something, the easier it becomes. But of course, the easy route currently is the one of like, oh, okay, I need to be really negative about this and just sack it all off and doubt myself, and that'll do. Because that's the easier route. That's what you've been doing for years.
It's interesting because I think we've really tapped into our 5 really critical blind spots. The big one is your identity is not your role. Who you are is not what you do. Um, and very often, salespeople, founders, managers, leaders over-identify with their company or their success, and we even describe ourselves. I'm a recruiter. I'm a salesperson. I'm an engineer. You're not. Those are role functions. And I think this then leads into self-awareness theatre. And in my experience, certainly from personal experience, I think I'm aware, but then I realize I'm not if I run to the sound of gunfire, if I invite criticism, because self-awareness is really about how other people receive us, because what we project out, we then get reflected back. And we might think that we're a fine, upstanding human being, but actually we're a bit of an ass. I think another blind spot is this worship of willpower. So what we do is we just try harder doing what already doesn't work, and then we get more and more frustrated and burn out. I think there's that perfectionism trap that causes paralysis. So if it's not perfect, then we don't ship it, and we treat trauma as fuel. So it whilst it's a huge driver to avoid the death penalty, it's also our biggest liability. So I'm curious how we can live and operate in a way that means that we're not a prisoner or a hostage to these blind spots.
I think self-awareness is a really good one to touch upon there. And as you said, it's actually how other people perceive us that is the real indicator of how self-aware somebody actually is. If you can be very open to somebody else's feedback, whether that be a family member, whether that be a friend, whether it be someone interviewing you, it's if you are open to that feedback and actually take it on board without becoming very defensive, that is a real sign of self-awareness, and one that a lot of people don't have. That is the hardest thing, to be able to hear how somebody else perceives you, because you automatically want to go, well, I'm not like that. You get very defensive, and that is a trait as human beings that we all have. That defensiveness, protection, we need to protect ourselves. And if someone's attacking us and saying something less than positive, you immediately go into that protection mode and you dispute it and you fight back or you retreat. And it's very interesting. Like, if you are someone who is able to take that feedback on board and say, that's really interesting that you see me that way, and then do some reflection within yourself, that is self-awareness. And that is really hard to do. Really hard to do. Self-awareness is a journey. It's not something that you go, oh, I'm self-aware now. I've done a bit of work myself. I'm very self-aware. No, it's a lifetime journey. It's something you'll be doing throughout your whole life if you truly want to feel like you are a self-aware human being.
So I think to summarize what we've just discussed is you can't out-strategize your own nervous system. Is that a fair observation?
It's a lot, and this is where I see it a lot as well, is that people think that if they just keep pushing and pushing, and I'm really motivated and I've got loads of willpower, and if I decide I'm going to do something, I'll do it. Unfortunately, what happens is if you are trying to do something consciously, but your subconscious part of your brain is running this story that tells you that you're not good enough or that you're not going to do it, you can't achieve this, and it's giving you this different narrative. What happens is that your subconscious and your conscious are kind of fighting it out between each other, but your subconscious will always win out. Always win out, no matter
You're not going
how
to
much
beat 3 billion
effort you
years
put.
of emotional hardwiring.
Absolutely. And so your conscious doesn't stand a chance. And that is when people do get burnt out, because they're trying, they're pushing, and they're doing everything they possibly can, using every single ounce of fuel in the tank. But you're fighting a losing battle. You can't actually rewire your brain just by with willpower alone. You need to actually understand what's going on beneath that.
So the pattern is you react emotionally first and then rationalize and justify using logic and reason and then whatever scripting you've got later. Is there a way to manage that emotional wave and ride it out?
So the subconscious is very emotional. I like to refer to it as like it's like a 2-year-old child, essentially. That part of your brain, that emotional, irrational part of your brain, is like dealing with a toddler. And that's how to see it. So when it rears its head, when you have this big emotional reaction, as we all do, something happens and we react. And what I try to teach people is you need to start thinking about response over reaction. Now, obviously, that requires being able to actually take a step back, which is hard to do when you are in an emotional state. But understanding that actually, when you feel a certain way, let's take anger, for example, say something has happened, it's made you feel angry, and you react. That's the behavior, the reaction. But the feeling underneath is the anger. Now, feelings themselves are actually chemical waves, and they only last for 90 seconds, which sounds mad because you think that's ridiculous because I go on and on and on for hours, maybe the whole day. But the actual wave of emotional feeling lasts for 90 seconds. What fuels it, what keeps it going, is the thought beneath it. So if you can address that feeling, right, okay, I've reacted, I've behaved in a certain way, the feeling underneath it is anger. I'm feeling really angry. Taking a big breath, stopping what you're doing, maybe even closing your eyes down, scanning your body head to toe, and just releasing any of that tension, all of that feeling. What you're doing in that moment is you're drawing away from the thought that's fueling it, because you're bringing attention to your body and the physical side of things, and you're not allowing for that thought to kind of continue. So after that 90 seconds, that feeling has passed, then you can actually take a little look at what was that thought? What happened? What triggered everything there? What was I thinking? What was I telling myself to cause this anger, to cause this reaction? And when you can find that underneath, that thought underneath, that story you've been telling yourself, perhaps in that case, it might have been, you're going to fail. And it's made you feel angry. You're going to fail. Okay, why? Am I going to fail? I don't have any proof of that. Perhaps it's a presentation at work. You're doing a presentation, your brain's told you you're going to fail, people are going to laugh at you. I don't have any proof of that. The last time I did that went really well. I got really good feedback. It's not true. And you start to question, you start to unpick, and you can begin to then reframe. So you're breaking that cycle, that sort of loop where you continually ride this 90-second wave of feeling over and over and over again because you're fueling it with thought. You're stopping that in its tracks so that you can then understand the thought underneath, figure out what it is, and begin to reframe it, question it. Don't take it at face value.
So there's a reaction, a feeling, and a thought loop. And if you can identify what the thought is, then
Mhm.
you can break the loop.
Absolutely.
Lovely. Okay. So I think there's, I'm not sure how to phrase this, maybe an evidence shelf. And what we need to do is be able to rebuild our internal validation. And very often what I see is that, and I do this all the time, if I get external praise, that doesn't stick because I've got my little narrative running in my head. So how do we turn real world wins and positive feedback into a revision of our self-concept? Who do I become if I believe this about myself?
So I use something called the evidence shelf, which is not something that I came up with the name of. I have taken that from Jack Frimston, from Sales is Therapy. So actually, they use it in a more sort of sales sense. But I use it in a more therapeutic sense. But the concept is the same. I've just kind of adapted it a little bit, made it better, if you will.
Of course.
So I take the evidence shelf and I get clients to curate this themselves. And the evidence shelf is that this little shelf that you have in your mind. Think of it as you perhaps, would a childhood shelf in your bedroom where you put your little trinkets, maybe a trophy or a medal or two, all the things that are most precious to you as a child. And that's what I get clients to curate, but in their mind. So we would talk about external evidence. So the external evidence is very much, looking at your day to day or what's happened in your past week, or even further back if you like. What has happened with your family, with your friends, with your colleagues? What has somebody said to you? What has somebody done for you? Basically, something that has affirmed who you are as a person. Positive, of course. We're not going for negative. We're going for positive moments where somebody has said or done something for you that has allowed you to think, oh, well, that's really nice. That makes me feel good about myself. So we take a piece of external evidence. Perhaps that is a work colleague saying to you, oh my gosh, you did that. That was amazing. I loved what you did in there with that presentation. That was fantastic. It was spot on. I took so much from that. Or your boss saying to you, you're working really, really hard at the moment, and I really appreciate everything you're doing, and I see what you're doing. What does that tell you about yourself? And then we have this second column, which we call our internal validation. So internally, what are we saying to ourselves internally to affirm who we are as a person? So, for example, taking that work example, you've done a great job, you're doing really well. What does that tell me about myself as a person? And I always make sure that people use their own words. I had a client recently who said, who had turned his internal internal validation into I'm a fucking good person. Right? And I was like, that's great. That's what we want. We want your language.
Yeah.
But it could be anything, I am loved, I am supported. It doesn't have to be long. It can just be a little short internal validation that affirms who you are as a person, the goodness within you, what you give to the world, what you give to other people, because you have that evidence, all of these things that have happened in your life that tell you that you are good enough. And by using that evidence, what you're doing is your brain loves an image. It loves a visual. So you're drawing upon actual things that have happened, memories, creating that visual for your brain. And it goes, oh, okay, that did happen actually. Okay, right. Okay, well, fair enough. That does tell you that. That's brilliant. Because you're adding an extra element rather than just, people talk about affirmations and you could stand there and, say to yourself, oh, I'm great, I'm brilliant, I'm enough. And you're just saying the words and they're quite empty. You don't have anything to attach them to. In this instance, you are creating that evidence for yourself. You're drawing upon that evidence, things that have actually happened to create this internal validation. And that's the key, internal validation, because a lot of people seek out external validation. So we're using the external evidence, but we're using it to create internal validation. You being able to affirm yourself.
If I look at how we hit that evidence shelf and I believed what I was telling myself, I think one of the best ways of capturing that is through journaling. And in my experience, when my clients journal, they will get anywhere between a 300 and 1200% improvement in their results. Those who don't journal will typically get 30 to 50% because the weakest think is stronger than the strongest memory. And I think top performers love to see themselves making progress. So I'm hearing what you're saying, and now we can put this into something practical. So if even if you struggle to keep a journal, keeping a regular note of when you're having these moments of validation and looking for that evidence, and then spending a couple of minutes in self-reflection and documenting it, that's likely to reinforce that positive self-concept. I suffer from something called aphantasia, which is I cannot visualize. So I'm really curious, for the 2% of the population who also have this condition, what advice would you give if you can't visualize?
I've actually had a client not that long ago who had aphantasia. And we very much, because obviously we create sort of these visuals in the brain when we're kind of in hypnosis and we're exploring certain things, we draw upon the other senses instead. So it's still very much possible for people to be able to access kind of this part of your brain where you can really walk through every part, but you draw upon the other senses a little bit more. So whilst you're not actually seeing this kind of visual in your mind, you can feel. That's the key, is the feelings are the key. So we might perhaps talk about the different senses, but the feelings are key anyway. So you can still feel. So if you are able to draw upon certain feelings, that in itself is the key. So it doesn't matter if you can visualize or not. But I love journaling. Journaling is absolutely fantastic. It's one of my favorite things, and I encourage everyone to do it because it is very much a case of you are reinforcing as you write. And I always try to encourage handwriting journaling, jotting things down with a pen and paper rather than on your phone, which, it's still great. Create a little folder on your phone of positive moments, fantastic. But always try to use pen and paper, because the actual physical act of writing with a pen, the looping of the words as you're doing it, the actual act of it just creates this far better sort of reinforcement for your brain. So because you are actually activating the part of your brain that tells you how to, use the pen and write the words, and you're having to activate various parts of your brain in order to do that. And so it just takes it on board far more when you are handwriting something. So that kind of reflection, that reinforcement just very much hits home just that little bit more than it would if you were kind of typing something down. There is a fantastic bit of research that's done on it, and I will not do it justice by talking about it, but there is some research done that shows the difference between when you type versus when you handwrite and the impact that has on your brain. So I would always suggest when you're journaling to handwrite. And it just allows for reflection. I have had a client recently who has really struggled with kind of negative thought loops and just being able to stop kind of that happening. It would go into a bit of a spiral. And being able to sit and journal and reflect has just allowed this moment of pause to be able to just stop that overthinking, that thought loop, and just focus on one thing. And it might be, I offer journaling prompts for people, for clients, for my group, sessions that I do. I offer those journaling prompts, which can be really helpful, because sometimes people think, like, what am I going to even write about? I sit down, like, what am I meant to write about? But some people enjoy just a brain dump, just everything out on the page. Everyone's different, and you can tailor it accordingly, but it's a fantastic thing to be able to do.
Can you give us some examples?
In terms of prompts?
Yeah.
Well, I do have a group that I run called the Story Circle, and we have kind of weekly themes, and they're based on I am statements. So I am statements are very much sort of affirm and reinforce the narrative that you are trying to give to your sort of subconscious mind. So I am statements are very powerful. So we base it on a theme. So for example, this week is I am in flow. So being able to allow ourselves to kind of let go of some control and get into kind of a natural rhythm of things, whether that be work, whether that be personal life, however you might feel that sort of emotionally, physically, mentally, it's being in flow. So we would have sort of journaling prompts, like, again, that sort of a journaling prompt might be, what does being in flow mean to me? How do I feel it in my body? How do I feel it emotionally? And then it might be, there might be another journaling prompt, which would be something along the lines of, how do I get myself into that flow state? Or what prevents me from being in flow? And it just allows you to kind of reflect on the sort of the blockages or something that might be preventing you from, being in this natural rhythm or causing you to feel this need for control in all areas and being stunted in some way. And you just begin to reflect on why that is. And why do I do that? And you start writing, and before you know it, you're kind of actually, you've written half a page. And you're like, oh, that's really interesting. And if you're doing that each day, and we do it just Monday to Friday, 5 days a week with a theme, and being able to just kind of address certain things, you begin to unlock. And I tend to obviously follow a bit of a structure when it comes to kind of being able to acknowledge what you're telling yourself, what's the story underneath that. And I prompt it in that way as well. And by the end of the week, it's like, oh, okay, that's quite interesting. And then what am I going to do for myself in order to address this? What can I do differently? What can I implement this week instead? But it's come from you. It's your journaling. It's like the prompt is just there. You can take it in whatever direction you want, but it allows you to kind of just focus on you, what's going on internally. And people don't do that. That's not something that we have time for. We don't have time to do that. So it just allows you to stop for a minute and take some time for yourself and reflect internally.
One of the most interesting things about journaling is that not only does it allow you to see that you are making progress, but if you review your journal a month ago, 3 months ago, a year ago, you see just how far you've progressed. And I'm a huge advocate of Dr. Albert Ellis's work. He's got this fantastic model, the ABCDE model. But for journaling purposes, I won't go into detail, look it up. But for journaling purposes, the A, the activating event, is what happened. Describe the situation without any spin. Just be objective about it. And then what was the belief that I had in that moment? And you've got to be brutally honest. Then look at the consequences. So what was the emotion or behavioral consequence? How did I feel? How did I react? And then dispute it. How can I dispute that belief? Is it true? Is there a better way to see this? And then look at what's a healthier thought or response that I can act on from the next time. So what's the effect? So I can reframe it and respond with more clarity and control. So I think to wrap this part of the conversation up, we have within our reach very simple resources and tools if we choose to employ them. However, there is that little voice in our head that's going to tell us that we're too busy, this won't work, this is all woo-woo stuff. So what would you say to that little voice?
That's the little voice that's keeping you stuck. That's the little bit that is preventing you from sort of achieving your full potential. We all know that we're capable of more if we're really honest with ourselves. I mean, it's very few people that can say, I do absolutely everything I possibly can to be the best version of myself. I think if we're all really honest and we hold that mirror up, you will be able to say, okay, I don't do that. And I don't do that, actually. I've been putting that off. There's so many things that we can implement but don't. So being able to just actually be honest with yourself. Don't allow that voice to take over, that narrative to be like, oh, do you know what? You could just do that next week. Oh, no, you don't need to do that right now. That's uncomfortable.
Well, the mathematics of incremental improvement is really interesting. If you improve intentionally by only 0.1%, over the course of a year, you will improve by 43%.
I love
If
that.
you improve by 0.5%, you will improve by 300%. And if you go the whole hog and you deliberately, intentionally improve by 1%, you'll improve by over 1,200% over the course of a year because of the compound effect. Now, it's not beyond the ken of anybody or the capability of anybody to improve by 0.1% a day. And I think this then brings us to quite neatly how we become a bottleneck through our identity, the danger of prove it again syndrome, and how perfectionism protects and paralyzes at the same time. And it manifests in behaviors like micromanagement, control, and obviously our old friend burnout. So let's speak to that. What is it that we do to become our own bottleneck?
It is very much those moments where you come up against something. It might be a new idea that you want to implement. It might be a challenge of some description. And that little voice that tells you, actually, that's probably not going to work. And that's a bit uncomfortable. And I always say that if you if you feel uncomfortable about something, you should do it more. That is a sign. If you feel discomfort, do it more, because that is your indicator that actually you should be doing it.
You built the cage, you hold the key. What now?
Yeah. So you be able to just kind of, if you can push through that discomfort, again, you are teaching your brain that we don't just give up at the first hurdle. We try. And yeah, sure, it might not work. That's okay. And I think that's where also people allow themselves to fall off a cliff, because if they come up, they try something and it doesn't work, again, that little voice told you so, told you it wouldn't work.
Wow. But that's the difference between understanding role failure and identity failure. Role failure is you fail in a function,
Mhm.
whereas identity is you fail as a human being. Now, the grim reality is that we will all fail, and in my experience, certainly failure has been my best teacher. I can't remember any significant learning that I've ever had from my successes. It's been, useful, but the reality is that it's those failures and that iterative improvement and that coming up against the grit in the oyster that helps you to develop and to grow. So some of the best advice I ever got was run to the sound of gunfire. Go looking for evidence that you are wrong and go looking for people who can prove you wrong, because that is how you grow, not by reinforcing what you already believe, but by stretching. So if we look at how founders behave, there are those who reframe and those who rationalize. If you're caught in the rationalization trap, how do you reframe?
The reframing is really hard. It can be really hard for people. And people, I think, again, people stop themselves at the first part of that because they go, well, what's that going to do? I'm just going to tell myself the opposite. That's not going to do anything. And you're sure it won't. It probably wouldn't do anything if you're simply just saying something to yourself sort of willy-nilly. It's very much based on being able to find that thought and uncover what's actually going on underneath. It's a whole process. It's not just a case of standing and saying like, I'm amazing over and over again. It's
Well,
very much a case of actually being able to unpack why you don't feel amazing in the first place, why you are doubting yourself in the first place.
I think that this is about replacing stories of protection with stories of purpose.
Hmm.
And I think too often we fail to do that because actually it means that we have to let go of the person that we become or come to believe we are. And letting go of that is hard. It's uncomfortable. So, what advice would you give to people who find themselves caught in that trap of being in protection rather than in purpose?
That identity that you create is who you've been for your whole life. It's who you have become. You have allowed these behaviors that you display to create this identity, this person that you are, who you present yourself as. And that is your safety net. That's who you are. And so to be able to say, oh, actually, I want to make some changes here and I want to do this differently and I don't want to behave like this anymore, that's really scary. It's very scary and it can be really hard. And there are people who just will choose not to do that because it is too much. It is too hard to open Pandora's box and start addressing all of this stuff that has allowed them to become the person they are today. Because the person they are today is safe. And this is fine. That'll do. I've accepted that, this is where I am in life and I'm not going to achieve this, and that's fine. That's safe. So there will be people who just choose not to do it, and that's okay. But there will also be the people who choose to open that box, take that lid off, allow everything to spill out, and that's hard. It's uncomfortable, it's polarizing, and it's very difficult to do. But there will be the people who choose to do it. And those are the people who are then able to start addressing what is going on underneath everything, why they behave the way they do, why they act the way they do, why they constantly feel the way they do. And they want to make that change. And they will see the difference. They will allow themselves to change this identity, behave a different way, become a better version of themselves, the best version they can be, not just a subpar average, I will accept this version of myself.
So, if we don't want to settle, I think there are a series of questions that are worthy of exploring. What belief am I defending that no longer serves me? Am I living by conscious choice or unconscious conditioning? What's the emotional cost of this version of me? how do I know if I'm leading or just reacting with authority? And what part of me needs to heal so I can lead cleanly? I think those 5 questions are pretty damn solid.
They are. They're good questions. But I love the emotional cost one. I think that's always a really good one to look
Yeah.
at because, people rarely think about what impact is this having on everyone and everything around me, because we are very biased individuals as humans. We are very much, this is me and my bubble. It's just you put yourself first. You are the priority, rightly so in a lot of ways, but then you do need to also take a look at, and this comes back to the self-awareness, what that impact has on everyone else around you. What is that doing to the people in your life? To, if you are a founder, what is that doing to the business in your life? The employees that you have, what are your behaviors doing? What impact is that having on them? And that is the cost of staying the same, staying stuck, still displaying behaviors again and again and again. It might be sacrificing time with your family, and then people turn around and it's like, oh, my child's grown up and I didn't even see it because I was at the office until 9, 10 o'clock at night. It might be, it might be a relationship breakdown, a divorce, because you physically didn't know how to put your partner first. Everything else came before. It might be a loss of friendships. If it's the case of a business, if it's the case of employees, people leaving, people choosing not to work for you because you treat them a certain way, or a business that then begins to crumble around you because you do not have all of the factors that allow you to push something forward in a positive way. Your behavior, the way that you react, is causing its demise. It's not helping, it's hindering.
So Emma and I are going to be running an event called Founder Dependency Unlocked on Halloween, 31st of October 2025. You'll be able to review the video of that as well. The lesson to take away, I think, is that you can't scale a company while you're running the same emotional operating system that got you to startup survival. Something has to update, and it starts with the thought. So please join both of us there. But before we go, have you got any books or resources that you can recommend people read, watch, listen to that you think might benefit them?
Podcast wise, I would say anything with Dr. Tara Swart. I think she's amazing. She's a neuroscientist and she's one of my favorites. I love
How do you spell her surname?
Swart, Dr. Tara Swart. And any podcast she's in, she's just fantastic. And I would recommend listening to her because she has some fantastic insights. And I mean, books wise, I'd be, I should really say I did my training with Marissa Peer and I think she's wonderful. So any of her books that she has written, Marissa Peer is brilliant as well in terms of being able to kind of understand the story that you're telling yourself. One of her books that I really enjoy is Tell Yourself a Better Lie.
Fabulous title. Well, I'm going to recommend 2 books by Albert Ellis. The first one is How to Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable About Anything, Yes, Anything. And the other one is How to Keep People from Pushing Your Buttons. Both of those are fantastic resources and will help you to become far more self-aware and take ownership. So, Emma, how can people get hold of you?
Well, I am probably most active on LinkedIn. That tends to be where most of my client base come from. So you can drop me a message on LinkedIn or you can head to my website, www.emmathompsontherapy.com. I also have a podcast called The 6-Minute Mind with Emma Thompson, which is 6-minute long meditations, if you want to go and have a listen to any of them.
Wonderful. Emma Thompson, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
So this is Marcus Cauchi signing off once again from the Inquisitor podcast. If you found this useful and insightful, then please like, comment, and share with somebody who'd benefit from it. And please do get in touch with either Emma or myself. And do join us on the 31st of October, 10 a.m. GMT for Founder Dependency Unlocked. In the meantime, stay safe and happy selling.